Are you wondering what the downside is in investing in income property? We're going to answer that great question in this video. Okay, let's rock. Let's talk about investing into income property and what the downsides might be, right? What the risks are, so-called the liabilities. That's definitely a great question, and I'm glad you've actually searched for this video. It's very important that you understand that if you've gotten yourself into a position where you've worked your tail off your whole life and you've gone through life and you've saved up money to where you're finally at that stage where you're ready to invest in income property so that in a sense you can kind of sit back and collect and get that mailbox money, that rent check every month from somebody else where you in a sense almost retire. Oh, I love that. But like you know, there are risks to consider, right? There is downside. So I'm here to tell you about that. So listen up. The biggest problem I see as a downside when you invest into rental property is that you're going to have this liability of this asset. In most cases, I'm assuming, by the way, that you're going to borrow some money, okay? We can obviously talk later about not borrowing money, but let's talk about assuming that you're going to buy a piece of income property and you're going to put down 20% or 25, 30%, and you're going to finance the rest. That's what most people do. Now, some people buy stuff cash, they buy a cheap house cash, and then they just rent it out, and that's fine. But in most cases, people are going to do some level of financing. If that's the case, the downside is you're going to put up 20 to 30% of your money on average to this rental property, to this investment property, and your hope is that you're going to get rent money every month, right? So you're going to have more money coming in rent, and then you're going to take part of that money, make your payment, pay your taxes and insurance, have a little bit set aside for maybe some maintenance here or there, and then you're going to have positive cash flow every month, right? In a sense, free money just coming in off that property. And then over the course of time, hopefully, those properties will appreciate in value. They'll go up in value, and your net worth will be higher. You'll have an asset that's worth a lot more money, so that if you ever sell it someday, you'll make a profit off of that as well. So it's a way to kind of double dip, right? You make the income as the asset is going from time to time, month to month. And then at the end, if you decide to sell, you make a profit in many cases off your sale of your property. The problem though, with that liability, with that loan that you have, is you're on the hook every month, just like your tenant is. The person that's paying you rent is paying you rent, and then you have to take that rent and you have to pay the bank. And so that's a liability. And so what happens if by any chance, for any reason, and believe me, any reason you can think of is probably going to happen. I hate to say it, but if you're in the real estate game long enough, the rental property game long enough, there's going to be situations that happen that just nothing could change, right? So as a result, you could have somebody lose their job and just come out flat out say, I can't pay your rent. You could have somebody just up and move and just stop paying you rent. They just like leave the state, leave the country and just stop paying you rent. You could have a situation like COVID-19 come up where everybody loses their jobs and virtually nobody can pay rent unless they get government stimulus money, right? Which that's what bailed most Americans out in that situation for a couple months. So when that comes up, this is my advice. This is what I like to do in situations like that. Anytime I've bought a piece of real estate that I wanted to use as an investment property, okay? I've thought, okay, if I can't make this note, if my tenant stops paying me, how long can I go? How many months? Can I last a year? How long can I go before I'm now going to be defaulting to the bank? How long can I go? How much money do I have saved up? And my general rule of thumb is that you really need to have at least, depending on the size of the property, at least 1 year worth of payments saved up in reserves so that if your tenant stops paying you, you have no excuse to the bank. Because remember, the bank doesn't care about your excuses. When you sign that note, you owe them the money. You can call your banker, you can email them, and they're going to listen to you in most cases and be nice, but they don't care. They just want their money every month. That's it. And if you're not going to pay it, they're going to find somebody else that will. So no big deal. You put down 20%, 25, 30%. They're going to repossess the property because you're not making payments. They're going to own it. So the bank's going to own it, and they're just going to sell it. And somebody else is either going to buy it for cash or buy it and finance it. And they just keep that process going. And the wonderful bank's going to make all the fees in the meantime and all the interest. That's how they stay in business, our wonderful banking system. So you have to understand that when you're buying that rental property, as much as maybe a friend or family member might have caked it up to be where they painted this picture where, yeah, just go buy yourself a couple of houses and just rent them out. Yeah, it's just that simple, right? So many factors are involved. It's so easy for your tenant to not pay you. And then you say, well, I'm just going to sue them. Okay, well, let's talk about that. So you're just going to sue that tenant, right? So let's say the tenant was paying you like $1,000 a month in rent, okay, for this house that you bought. All right, most attorneys that I know, the average attorney going rate right now in this day and age, the average is $300 to $500 an hour, okay? So that goes by pretty quick. So you're going to hire an attorney and spend $300 to $500 an hour on average to go after this poor person that lost their job that has no money. And let's say you win, you're right. You know, you signed a lease, they broke it, they didn't honor their word, and you're ready to just like bury them, right? You're going to go after them, you want all their money, and they have nothing. So you go to court, you waste all your energy, all your time, and you get a settlement that, okay, they're supposed to pay you like the last 3 months of rent for $3,000. And your attorney, your wonderful attorney, sends you the bill. Hey, you owe me $5,000 or you owe me $10,000. So you spent $5,000 or $10,000 to legally get a judgment against somebody for $3,000. And then, doesn't mean they're going to have it or pay you. That just means they owe it to you. Now you got to collect it. So now you become a collection agency, right? So you see all the problems that you deal with rental properties. And then, heaven forbid, you get a really tough tenant. One that just nitpicks, complains about everything, expects you to just show up every day and fix something because they find something wrong with this 50-year-old piece of property that you just bought. There's always going to be something wrong with it, but they want you to fix it nonstop. And then they become this big hassle. And maybe they withhold rent from you, which they're not supposed to, but maybe they do that. And you're not getting paid. Remember, that's why I recommend at least 1 year. So that way you can pay the bank. You can pay the bank. You can pay the bank. And that way, if you notice, like, wait a second, 3 months have gone by, 4 months, 5 months. Oh my gosh, this guy, I got to evict him now. So now you get in the process where you got to kick the person out for non-payment of rent. And I'm sure you got to get like the sheriff involved and police and all this stuff, but that's a process. And then again, you're still making your payments to the bank. You should go in the direction, if something like that was to happen, of possibly trying to sell the actual piece of property if you haven't found somebody else to move in. And you can see this could be a bad cycle. So that's one of the biggest risks is really not making any money and then having this liability where you're losing money. And then what's even worse is just losing your peace, right? The pain and the agony of dealing with the whole situation. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to deal with that. So I'm not trying to scare you off, because in most situations, if you're savvy enough to understand buying investment properties, right, and investing into them, you're going to probably be smart enough to even vet your tenants, right, to kind of see, hey, ask them, how long have they had their job? What company are they with? You know, how long do they plan on being there, right? Maybe they're very settled. Maybe they're getting ready to move out of state in 6 months and they've actually told you that. So maybe you got to do a short-term lease and you just tell them, hey, I need half the rent up front for 6 months. And then when the third month comes, you need to pay the other, the last 3 months or something like that. There's so many things you can structure, but that's a huge risk. Another risk with, obviously investment properties is the liabilities of maybe legal action being brought against you. So if you haven't done your due diligence on your property and you just rush into buying this piece of real estate or whatever, and you're like, oh my gosh, it was way undervalued and I'm going to just start renting it out. I'm going to make a ton of money because it was way under market. And then you find out, there was like mold or asbestos or something because the house was so old or something like that. And now somebody gets sick and now they're suing you. And now you're dealing with this whole lawsuit, right? So that's a huge downside, a huge, thing you got to consider when you're buying income property is make sure you have done your inspections. You've gotten certified inspectors for each of those things to make sure that the thing is in good working order, that the people aren't going to get sick when they're living in your income property and things like that, because no amount of money is worth hurting somebody and surely not getting sued over everything. So if you decide to get an income property, what I do is I set them up as an LLC, a limited liability company. So that way the tenant is actually paying that entity. You get it? They're not paying me. I'm the one that owns the entity, or maybe I'm the only member. I'm a single member LLC, so I own it. Or maybe I have a partner, but we're not the ones that are getting the money. We indirectly get it, right, off the dividends, off the distributions, but the actual tenant is paying that entity. So if a lawsuit or something was to happen, you maybe want to protect yourself by having an LLC so that they would have to actually sue that, and that's all that they could maybe go after. Maybe you have other assets personally that they could not come after. But you have to seek an attorney for that advice. I'm not your guy for that. I'm not a licensed attorney. Make sure you ask for legal advice. So the biggest risks, just to kind of recap, the downsides in having income property, honestly, is the risk of not making any money or losing money as a result of your tenant not paying you. the risk of losing the money that you put down, right? Your life savings or whatever, a big chunk of your life savings or that you actually put down on the property. If the bank forecloses on you and you didn't save up enough money to survive and weather the storm, you're going to lose that money as well. And then the risk of maybe having something like a legal lawsuit, somebody getting hurt or something like that. So these are some of the things you got to consider. I hope you found this video helpful. Just know that I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. If you've got any questions, please comment. I'll do my best to answer them as soon as possible. And don't forget, in business, things aren't always easy, all right? And when it gets tough, never quit. Just push.